Welcome back. So today's segment we're going to be looking at Satan's war against the people of God. This will be broken down into a few subsections. The first one we're going to look at is going to be Satan's all-out war and his mark and his number of the beast. Revelation 12 first takes us back to the birth of Jesus to show that the Messiah and God's chosen people are the main focus of Satan's hatred and wrath. It then moves forward to the time of Christ's second coming. Satan's warfare against God's people, including Jesus Christ, the natural descendants of ancient Israel, and all true Christians, is the primary subject of Revelations 12 and 13. These chapters explain the devil's motivation and introduce the worldly powers he employs in his end-time battle against Christ and his servants. John begins, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed in the sun, with the moon under her feet, and her head a garland of 12 stars. Revelation 12, 1-2. This woman symbolizes the people of God, chosen to be the light of the world, in contrast with the woman of Revelation 12, who is mother of harlots. Or Revelation 17, that I should say. The imagery here recalls the ancestral history of ancient Israel. The patriarch Joseph described one of his revelatory dreams to his family. Then he said, 'Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me.' So he told it to his father Jacob, or Israel, and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, 'What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?' Genesis 37, 9-10. Nevertheless, after Joseph became Pharaoh's chief deputy in Egypt, his family did bow before him. His dream proved to be a revelation from God. Jacob, Joseph's father, quickly grasped the symbolism in Joseph's dream. The sun represented Jacob, the moon his wife, and the stars his sons, 12 in all, counting Joseph. In other words, the symbolism in Joseph's dream referred to Jacob's family, from which the ancient nation of Israel developed. The woman in Revelation 12, clothed in these same symbols, also represents Jacob's family. After it has expanded into a nation, God's chosen people, Israel, many hundreds of years after the time of Joseph, the Jews, descendants of the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and a few remnants of other tribes were the only descendants of ancient Israel remaining in Palestine. The mighty Roman Empire dominated them when the time came for Jesus, the Messiah, to be born in the Jewish nation. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Revelations 12:5. But notice what happened immediately after Christ's birth. Satan, symbolized by the dragon, stood before the woman, who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. Verse 4. The Gospels record how Satan influenced Herod, the Jews' Roman appointed king, to murder all male children 2 years old and younger in and around Bethlehem in an attempt to eliminate the potential threat to his throne. Matthew 2:16. The king didn't know God had already spared Jesus by having his human parents whisk him off to Egypt until Herod died. Verses 13-14. Because of God's loving nature, Satan was prevented from destroying the favored woman. Revelation 12:6. Nevertheless, Satan will again relentlessly persecute and kill God's people at the time of the end. Satan's all-out war. Notice the next event. A war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And that's verses 7 to 9. This event comes shortly before Christ returns to bring salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God. Verse 10. So God's angel announces, Therefore rejoice, O heavens, in you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Verse 12. When Satan loses his battle with God's angels, he directs his fury at the people of God, symbolically represented by the woman mentioned earlier, verses 13. Evidently, the spiritual Israel of God, who are now members of his church, and you can see Galatians 6:16, 3:7, and 29, Romans 2:25 to 29. God promises this favored woman a place where she is nourished for a time and times and a half, 3.5 years. For the presence of the serpent, verse 14, God will intervene to help the woman survive during this time of unbelievable affliction, verses 15 to 16. Satan's war will be directed not only against this natural physical offspring of Israel as at the birth of Christ, but even more specifically against the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Verse 17. Notice that Satan will especially rage against commandment-keeping saints who follow the actual teachings of Christ. All of them are destined to be hated, though some are prophesied to survive the Satan-inspired onslaught. The scriptures reveal that many others will be martyred, as Christ has already warned. Then they will deliver you up to the tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Matthew 24:9. The mark and number of the beast. The second beast of Revelation 13 will cause all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Verses 16 to 17. What is behind this strange-sounding practice? How will it affect people as the time of the end draws near? There is historical evidence that in the ancient Babylonian culture, slaves were identified by some kind of mark, either tattooed or branded on the face or back of the hand. And you can reference that with the book The Greatness That Was Babylon by Sags. There may be parallels between this ancient practice and what God reveals will happen in the end time. Many have speculated about the meaning of this puzzling prophecy. Some interpret it in terms of supercomputers, unique personal identifying numbers, and even microchips embedded under the skin. However, we should consider that receiving a mark on the hand or the forehead could well be figurative. Remember from Revelation 7:3 that God's servants were sealed on their foreheads, and in Deuteronomy 6 Moses told God's people to keep all his statutes and his commandments, noting, "You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes." Verses 2 and 8. The hand and forehead here represent one's actions and thoughts respectively, which should be dedicated to obeying God. Likewise, the mark of the beast is evidently a mark of disobedience to God. Other prophecies in the book of Revelation show a great counterfeit religious figure and system will play major roles in leading people away from the true God and play into Satan's hands at this time. The Bible does not explicitly define the specific methods that the beast will use to identify those free to participate in commerce at the time of the end. Some sort of advanced surveillance may be involved. As to the number of the beast, 666, we are told to count the number, and that it is the number of man. Revelation 13:18. One early explanation is attributed to John's disciple Polycarp, who, according to his student Irenaeus, said this number is derived from adding together the numerical equivalents of the letters of the word Latinos, the Greek word for Roman, this being the name of the beast empire, its ruler, and everyone in it. So the number may well denote this general distinction, though it could also be more specific. However this prophecy is fulfilled, it is clear that it will involve compromising and contradicting God's commands. Having proof that one is officially associated in some way with the beast may well be necessary for one to be allowed to engage in commerce. Exactly how the end-time number of the beast 666 will be used and applied is not yet clear, but in some way it will be associated with the beast's name and applied to his evil activities. So that concludes the first subsection of Satan's war against the people of God. And tune into the next one here to catch what the next part of that will involve.